The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Wallace, Idaho's dusty Main Street, and Beatrice Reynolds stepped down into the afternoon heat with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a heart full of dread. Her boots touched the wooden planks of the sidewalk, and she looked around at the rough mining town with its saloons and supply stores, wondering how her life had crumbled so completely in just 3 months. The telegram that had summoned her west promised a teaching position and a fresh start, but when she arrived at the supposed school building, she found only an abandoned structure with boarded windows and a notice that read, "Closed by order of the mining company." She stood there on that dusty street, watching miners and cowboys pass by without a second glance, feeling more alone than she ever had in her 22 years. Back in Boston, she had been dismissed from her previous position when the headmistress discovered her father's gambling debts had forced the family into bankruptcy. Her mother had died 2 years prior from consumption, and her father had drunk himself to death just 6 weeks ago, leaving Beatrice with nothing but his debts and a tarnished name. The teaching position in Wallace had seemed like divine intervention, a chance to escape the shame and start over where nobody knew the Reynolds name. Now that hope lay as dead as the dreams she had carried west. A man on horseback rode past, kicking up dust that settled on her dark blue traveling dress. She coughed and stepped back, clutching her carpetbag tighter. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She had exactly $7 to her name, no place to stay, and no prospects in a town where women were scarce and respectable work even scarcer. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from her right, deep and steady. She turned to find a cowboy leaning against a post, his hat tipped back enough that she could see eyes the color of summer sky watching her with genuine concern. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and the kind of face that looked like it smiled often, though at the moment it held only curiosity. "I am afraid I might be," Beatrice admitted, then caught herself. Her Boston upbringing demanded she not speak so freely to strange men, but what did propriety matter now? She had no reputation left to protect. The cowboy straightened and walked over, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Frank Garrison," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I work at the Triple Creek Ranch about 5 miles north. You waiting for someone?" "I was supposed to be." Beatrice gestured toward the abandoned building. "I came for a teaching position that apparently no longer exists." "The letter I received was dated 3 months ago. I suppose they did not think to inform me of the change in circumstances." Frank looked at the building, then back at her, his expression darkening with understanding. That would be Harrison Mining Company. They shut down the school when they decided educating the miners' children was not profitable enough. Most families moved on to other camps. He paused, studying her face. "You came all the way from back east, Boston," she confirmed, hearing the tremor in her own voice and hating it. She had promised herself she would not cry, would not show weakness, but the weight of everything threatened to crush her right there on that dusty street. "Got family here? Friends?" Beatrice shook her head, looking down at her scuffed boots. "No, I have no one." The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible in their honesty. She had not meant to say it quite like that, had not meant to reveal the full depth of her desperation to a complete stranger. But perhaps it did not matter anymore. Perhaps nothing mattered except figuring out how she would survive the night, let alone the coming weeks. Frank was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally looked up at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His jaw was set, determined, as though he had just made an important decision. "You have me now," he said firmly. "That is enough." Beatrice blinked, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon," I said. "You have me now." He adjusted his hat, then picked up her carpetbag before she could protest. The Triple Creek always needs help. The owner's wife, Martha Garrison, she is my aunt, has been saying for months she needs someone to help with the house and the bookkeeping. She is getting on in years, and my uncle refuses to admit they need assistance. "You can work there, earn your keep plus wages." "I could not possibly impose on your family based on a chance meeting," Beatrice protested, even as hope flickered dangerously in her chest. "You know nothing about me." "I know you came all this way for an honest job teaching children," Frank said. "I know you are alone in a rough town as the sun is setting, which is a dangerous place for any woman, let alone one as pretty as you." He said it matter-of-factly, without the leering tone she had heard from other men. "I know you need help and I am offering it. What else do I need to know?" "You are very trusting, Mr. Garrison." "Frank," he corrected. "And I pride myself on being a good judge of character. My horse is tied up at the saloon. Come on, we can make it back to the ranch before full dark if we leave now." Beatrice knew she should be more cautious, should not trust a strange man so easily. But what choice did she have? Sleep in the street? Use her last few dollars on a boarding house and then starve? She had come west for a new beginning, and perhaps this unexpected offer was exactly that, just not in the form she had imagined. "Very well," she said softly. "Thank you, Frank." His face broke into a warm smile that reached his eyes, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "No need for thanks. Come on, Miss Reynolds." "Beatrice," she found herself saying. "If we are to be informal, you should call me Beatrice." They walked together to the saloon where his horse was tied, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. Frank secured her carpetbag to the saddle, then surprised her by leading the horse rather than mounting. "We will walk," he explained. "More comfortable for you than riding double, and Copper here does not mind the exercise." As they left the main street of Wallace behind, following a dirt road that wound through pine trees and rocky outcroppings, Frank asked about her journey west. Beatrice found herself talking more freely than she had in months, telling him about the long train ride, the changing landscape, her nervousness about starting over. She did not tell him everything, not yet, but there was something about his easy manner that made conversation feel natural rather than forced. "I have never been to Boston," Frank said when she paused. "Never been further east than Denver, actually. What is it like?" "Crowded," Beatrice said with a small laugh. "So many people packed into narrow streets, buildings tall enough to block out the sky. Everything moves fast there, everyone always rushing somewhere. It is beautiful in its own way, but also suffocating. I think I needed to leave even before circumstances forced the matter." "This country has a way of calling to people," Frank agreed. "I was born here, up in Montana actually. My family moved to Idaho when I was 12, after my father died in a logging accident. Uncle James and Aunt Martha took us in, me and my mother and my younger sister. My mother passed 5 years ago and my sister got married and moved to Portland, so the ranch is family to me now." "I am sorry about your parents," Beatrice said softly. "I am sorry about yours," Frank replied, and she realized she must have mentioned her father's death without thinking. Losing family is never easy, no matter how old you are when it happens. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the horses' hooves on the packed dirt, the whisper of wind through the pines, and the distant call of a hawk. The air smelled clean and sharp, so different from Boston's coal smoke and sewage. Beatrice breathed deeply, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen slightly. "Tell me about the ranch," she said eventually. What should I expect? The Triple Creek runs about 2,000 acres of good grazing land, Frank explained, his voice taking on a note of pride. We run cattle mostly, some horses. Uncle James employs about a dozen men year-round, more during roundup. Aunt Martha handles the house and the money, though her arthritis has been making it harder for her. She is a tough woman, survived things that would break most people, but she is fair and kind. You will like her. And if she does not want my help, Beatrice asked, voicing the fear that had been growing with each step. If she thinks her nephew has made a mistake bringing home a stranger, Frank glanced at her, his expression serious. Then I will take you to the Hendersons, who run the next ranch over, or to the Reverend Miller in town, or to any of a half-dozen families I know who would help you. But it will not come to that. Aunt Martha has been praying for help for months. She will see your arrival as the answer to those prayers. His certainty was both comforting and unsettling. Beatrice had learned not to trust in easy answers or the kindness of strangers. Life had taught her that everything came with a price, that nothing was truly free. Yet Frank seemed to operate under different rules, as though helping someone in need was simply what decent people did without expecting anything in return. The sun had nearly set when they crested a rise and Frank pointed ahead. There, that is home. Beatrice looked down into a valley where a sprawling ranch house sat surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and pastures. Lights glowed warm in the windows, smoke drifted from the chimney, and even from a distance, she could see cattle dotting the hillsides. It looked solid and real and permanent in a way nothing in her life had felt for a very long time. It is beautiful, she breathed. It is a good place, Frank agreed. Hard work, but honest, the kind of place where a person can build a real life. They descended the slope as twilight deepened, stars beginning to appear in the vast sky overhead. Beatrice noticed several men near the barn, finishing evening chores. They looked up with curiosity as Frank led her into the yard, but he gave them a nod and headed straight for the house. The front door opened before they reached it, light spilling out along with the scent of cooking meat and bread. A woman stood in the doorway, small and wiry with steel-gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and her weathered face held both strength and warmth as her eyes moved from Frank to Beatrice. Frank Garrison, you had better have a good explanation for missing supper and worrying me half to death, she said, but there was no real anger in her tone. Sorry, Aunt Martha. Frank stepped up onto the porch, gently guiding Beatrice forward. I have brought you the help you have been praying for. This is Beatrice Reynolds. She came to Wallace to take the teaching position, but the school closed. She has nowhere to go, and I figured you could use someone good with numbers and managing a household. Martha studied Beatrice for a long moment, and Beatrice forced herself to stand straight and meet the older woman's gaze despite her exhaustion and fear. She had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of except circumstances beyond her control. If Martha Garrison turned her away, she would find another path forward somehow. Come inside, child, Martha said finally, stepping back from the door. You look dead on your feet, and I do not conduct interviews on the porch. Frank, take her bag to the blue room and then come down for your supper. It is cold by now, but that is your own fault. Yes, madam, Frank said with a grin, grabbing Beatrice's carpetbag and disappearing up a staircase. Martha led Beatrice into a large kitchen that smelled gloriously of roasted chicken and fresh bread. A massive wooden table dominated the room, scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. Copper pots hung from hooks on the wall, and a cheerful fire burned in the enormous stone hearth. Sit, Martha commanded, pulling out a chair. When did you last eat? This morning, Beatrice admitted. Bread and cheese at the last stage stop. Martha made a disapproving noise and began loading a plate with food. We run a working ranch, which means we eat well and plenty. Nobody goes hungry under my roof. She set the plate in front of Beatrice along with a cup of coffee so strong the smell alone was invigorating. Now eat, and then you can tell me your story. Beatrice did not need to be told twice. The food was simple but delicious, and she ate with an appetite sharpened by worry and travel. Martha moved around the kitchen, putting away dishes and cleaning up from the evening meal, her movements economical despite the stiffness Frank had mentioned. When Beatrice finally pushed back her empty plate, Martha sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee. "Better?" the older woman asked. "Much, thank you, Mrs. Garrison." "Martha, please. Now tell me why a well-spoken young woman from Boston is alone in Wallace, Idaho with nowhere to go." There was no judgment in Martha's voice, only straightforward curiosity. Beatrice took a breath and told her story, all of it this time. Her father's gambling, the debts, her mother's death, losing her teaching position, her father's suicide by alcohol, and the desperate letter she had sent accepting the Wallace position without waiting for confirmation. She left nothing out, unwilling to start this new chapter with lies or omissions. When she finished, Martha was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee. "That is a heavy load for someone so young to carry," she said finally. "You have no other family?" "No, madam. My mother was an only child and her parents died years ago. My father had a brother, but they had a falling out before I was born. I would not know how to reach him even if I wanted to, which I do not. He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us." Martha nodded slowly. "Frank was right to bring you here. I do need help, more than I like to admit. My hands give me trouble, especially with writing, and managing the ranch accounts has become difficult. We also run a household of 15 people, counting the ranch hands who take their meals here. It is too much for one woman, though my stubborn husband refuses to see it." "I can keep books," Beatrice said eagerly. "I managed my father's accounts for years, though admittedly there was not much to manage by the end. I can cook and clean and sew. I am a hard worker, I promise you." "I can see that from your eyes," Martha said. "You have the look of someone who understands what work means. Here is what I am offering. Room and board plus $20 a month. You will help me with the house, the cooking, and especially the bookkeeping. You will take your meals with the family and have Sundays off to attend church or do as you please. The work will be hard, but you will be treated with respect. Any of the men cause you trouble, you come straight to me or to Frank." $20 a month was more than Beatrice had dared hope for, plus room and board. It was not teaching, but it was honest work and a safe place to stay. "I accept," she said quickly. "Thank you, Martha. I will not disappoint you." "See that you do not," Martha said, but her severe words were softened by a smile. "Now you look exhausted. Frank should have your room ready. We rise at 5 for breakfast at 5:30. I will wake you tomorrow and show you around. For tonight, just rest." Beatrice stood, swaying slightly as exhaustion crashed over her. "I cannot thank you enough, you and Frank both. I did not expect such kindness from strangers." "We are not strangers anymore," Martha said firmly. "We are family now, or as good as. That is how we do things out here. Now go on up. Blue room is second door on the right." Beatrice climbed the stairs, her legs heavy as lead. She found the blue room easily, a small space with whitewashed walls, a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a chest of drawers. Her carpetbag sat on the bed, and someone had left a lit oil lamp on the dresser. A window looked out over the darkened ranch yard, and through it, she could see the vast expanse of stars overhead, more than she had ever seen in Boston's light-polluted sky. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face in the cold water from the pitcher, and climbed into bed. The mattress was more comfortable than she had expected, the quilts warm and smelling faintly of lavender. For the first time in months, Beatrice felt safe. She had a roof over her head, food in her stomach, and work waiting for her in the morning. It was not the life she had planned, but it was infinitely better than being alone and desperate in a strange town. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought of Frank Garrison and his immediate, unhesitating kindness. She had no one, and he had simply decided she had him now, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She did not understand it, did not quite trust it yet, but she was grateful for it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight she could rest. Morning came brutally early with a knock on her door. Beatrice jerked awake, disoriented in the unfamiliar room until memory flooded back. "Yes," she called out, her voice rough with sleep. 5 o'clock, Martha's voice came through the door. "Breakfast in 30 minutes. Beatrice scrambled out of bed, shivering in the cool morning air. She dressed quickly in her most practical dress, a gray cotton that had seen better days but was clean and serviceable. She braided her long brown hair, pinned it up, and hurried downstairs following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. The kitchen bustled with activity. Martha stood at the enormous cast-iron stove, cooking what looked like enough food to feed an army. Frank sat at the table along with an older man who had to be his Uncle James and 3 ranch hands. They all looked up when Beatrice entered, the ranch hands with obvious curiosity, James with thoughtful assessment. "Good morning," Beatrice said, suddenly self-conscious under their collective gaze. "Morning," Frank said with a warm smile. "Sleep well." "Very well, thank you." "This is my Uncle James," Frank continued, gesturing to the older man. "Uncle James, this is Beatrice Reynolds, the woman I told you about." James Garrison was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-armed from years of hard work. His hair was more gray than brown, and his face was weathered like old leather, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. He stood and offered his hand, which surprised Beatrice. Most men did not shake hands with women, especially servants. "Welcome to Triple Creek," James said, his grip firm but not crushing. "Martha tells me you are going to help her run this place properly. About time someone did." "I will certainly try, sir." "James, please. We do not stand on ceremony here. Sit down and eat. Martha will put you to work soon enough." Beatrice sat next to Frank, acutely aware of his presence. The ranch hands were introduced as Tom, a grizzled man in his 50s who served as foreman. Pete, who looked barely 20 and had an eager, friendly face. And Caleb, somewhere in his 30s with a quiet demeanor. They nodded politely, but quickly returned their attention to their food, clearly more interested in eating than conversation at this early hour. Martha delivered plates piled with bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and thick slices of fresh bread with butter. Beatrice ate more slowly than the night before, observing the easy dynamics of the household. The men talked about the day's work, discussing fence repairs and a sick cow and moving cattle to a different pasture. Frank participated fully in the conversation, and it became clear he was not just a hired hand but an integral part of the ranch's operation. After breakfast, the men headed out to begin their work, Frank pausing to catch Beatrice's eye. "If you need anything, I will be around," he said quietly. "Do not let Aunt Martha work you too hard on your first day." "I heard that," Martha called from the sink where she was already washing dishes. "Get on with you, Frank. The girl and I will be fine." Frank grinned and left, and Beatrice stood to help with the dishes. Martha accepted her assistance without comment, and they worked in companionable silence for a while before Martha said, "You will find that running a ranch household is different from a city one. We cook for a crowd 3 times a day every day. The men work hard and eat accordingly. Laundry is a full day's work once a week. The house needs constant cleaning with so many muddy boots tracking through, and then there is the bookkeeping, which I will show you today. I am ready to learn, Beatrice assured her. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Martha showed her the pantry, an impressive room stocked with sacks of flour and sugar, canned goods, dried beans, and smoked meats. She explained the weekly routine, the monthly supply orders from Wallace, and the careful budgeting required to run such a large operation. Then she led Beatrice to a small office off the main room where ledgers were stacked on a desk. "This is where I keep all the ranch accounts," Martha explained, settling into a chair with a grimace that suggested her arthritis was bothering her. "Income from cattle sales, expenses for supplies and wages, breeding records, everything. It needs to be updated daily, but I have fallen behind." She opened the current ledger to show pages of cramped, difficult handwriting, some entries crossed out or corrected. "My hands shake now. I make mistakes." Beatrice sat down and examined the books with growing interest. The system was solid, but the recent entries showed the struggle Martha described. "I can do this," she said confidently. "I will need you to explain some of the cattle terminology, but the mathematics and organization are straightforward." Relief washed over Martha's face. "You have no idea how much I have worried about this. James is brilliant with cattle and land management, but he cannot add 2 numbers together to save his life. Frank is better, but he has his own responsibilities. I have been afraid of making a serious error that could cost us dearly." They spent the next several hours going through the books together, Martha explaining the ranch's operations while Beatrice made notes and asked questions. Despite her exhaustion from travel, Beatrice found herself fascinated by the complexity of running a cattle ranch. It was far more than just herding cows. There were breeding schedules to maintain, market prices to track, supply chains to manage, and seasonal patterns to account for. "You have a good head for this," Martha observed around noon. "Better than I expected. Where did you learn bookkeeping?" "My father," Beatrice said, surprised at how little pain the memory caused now. "Before the gambling consumed him, he was a shipping clerk. He taught me to keep accounts when I was quite young. He said a woman should understand numbers because men often tried to cheat those who did not." "Your father was right about that, whatever his other failings," Martha said. "Come on, we need to start dinner. The men will be in at 1 o'clock, hungry as wolves." Preparing the midday meal was another education. Martha worked with efficiency born of decades of practice, and Beatrice did her best to keep up, chopping vegetables and setting the table while Martha handled the more complex cooking. The men trooped in exactly at 1, as promised, Frank among them. He caught Beatrice's eye and smiled, a small private thing that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. She pushed the reaction aside, confused by it. She had known Frank for less than 24 hours. He was her benefactor, her employer's nephew, nothing more. Yet there was something about his steady presence, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her that made her heart behave in ways it never had before. The afternoon brought more work, cleaning up after the meal and then starting preparations for supper. Martha also showed Beatrice around the rest of the house, a sprawling structure with a large living room dominated by a stone fireplace, James and Martha's bedroom on the ground floor, and 4 smaller bedrooms upstairs where Frank, 2 of the senior ranch hands, and now Beatrice slept. The other hands lived in a bunkhouse near the barn. By the time supper was finished and cleaned up, Beatrice was exhausted in a way that felt somehow satisfying. She had worked hard, learned much, and felt useful for the first time in months. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Frank appeared in the hallway, apparently heading to his own room. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Long," Beatrice admitted with a tired smile. "But good. Your aunt is an excellent teacher and the work is satisfying." "I am glad." Frank leaned against the door frame of his room, making no move to go inside. "I know it must be strange, being in a new place with people you do not know." "Strange, but not unwelcome. Everyone has been kind." She paused, then added softly, "Especially you. I have not properly thanked you for what you did bringing me here. You saved me from a very bad situation." Frank shook his head. "I did what anyone decent would do. You needed help and I was able to provide it. No thanks necessary." "I think you would be surprised how many people would have walked past without stopping," Beatrice said. "In Boston, people step over beggars in the street without a second glance. You did not even know me, yet you trusted me enough to bring me to your family's home. I told you, I am a good judge of character." His expression grew more serious. "When you said you had no one, the look in your eyes, I have seen that look before. My mother had it after my father died, before Uncle James took us in. It is the look of someone standing on the edge of an abyss, not sure if they will fall. I could not walk away from that." Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You are a good man, Frank Garrison." "I try to be," he said simply. "Get some rest, Beatrice. Tomorrow will be another long day." She nodded and went into her room, closing the door and leaning against it. The moonlight streamed through the window, silvering everything it touched. She thought about Frank's words, about the abyss she had been standing on the edge of just yesterday. He had pulled her back from it without hesitation, and she did not quite know what to do with the gratitude and the growing warmth she felt toward him. The days settled into a rhythm. Beatrice rose early, helped Martha with breakfast, spent her mornings on bookkeeping and household management, and her afternoons helping prepare meals and maintain the house. The work was constant and physically demanding, but she found satisfaction in it. The ranch books began to reflect her careful attention, entries clear and organized, errors corrected, patterns emerging that helped with planning and budgeting. Martha praised her work and gradually gave her more responsibility. Within 2 weeks, Beatrice was handling the entire bookkeeping operation, only consulting Martha on major decisions. She also took over menu planning and the weekly supply orders, which Martha accepted with obvious relief. The ranch hands grew accustomed to her presence, treating her with respectful friendliness. Tom the foreman turned out to have a dry sense of humor that often made her laugh. Pete was eager and earnest, reminding her of students she had taught back in Boston. Caleb remained quiet but nodded politely whenever they crossed paths. And then there was Frank. He was always there, a steady presence at meals around the ranch, occasionally in the house on some errand or another. He never pushed himself on her, never made inappropriate comments or gestures, but she was intensely aware of him. She noticed how patient he was with the younger hands, teaching them with good humor. She saw how he helped his aunt without being asked, carrying heavy pots or reaching high shelves. She heard his laugh ring out across the yard and found herself smiling in response. A month after her arrival, Martha asked Beatrice to take some paperwork to Frank, who was working in the barn. Beatrice found him in one of the stalls, examining a horse's hoof. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into that warm smile that never failed to affect her. "Morning," he said, setting down the hoof and straightening. "What brings you out here?" "Your aunt needs you to sign off on this breeding record," Beatrice said, holding out the paper. "And she wants to know if the roan mare is ready to start training." Frank took the paper and a pencil, signing his name in a surprisingly neat hand. "Yes to the mare. She has a good temperament, should take to saddle training well." He handed back the paper, then asked, You settling in all right?" "It has been a month now." "More than all right," Beatrice assured him. "I feel more at home here than I ever did in Boston, if I am honest. The work is hard, but it is meaningful. I can see the results of my efforts." "I noticed you have been working on the books late into the evening," Frank said. "You do not have to push yourself so hard." "I want to," Beatrice said. "Your aunt and uncle took me in when they had no obligation to do so. The least I can do is ensure the work is done properly." Frank studied her for a moment, something thoughtful in his expression. "You know, you can think of this as your home now, not just a place where you work. You do not owe us anything beyond honest labor, which you have more than provided." "It is difficult to think that way," Beatrice admitted. "I have been dependent on charity, on kindness. I do not want to take advantage." "It is not charity," Frank said firmly. "You work harder than any two people I know. You earn your place here, Beatrice. I hope you understand that." The way he said her name, soft and sincere, made her heart flutter. She found herself looking into his blue eyes, noticing the gold flecks she had never seen before, the way the barn's dim light cast shadows on his strong jawline. The moment stretched between them, charged with something she did not quite understand but felt deeply. A horse nickered, breaking the spell. Beatrice stepped back, flustered. "I should get back. Thank you for signing the paper." "Beatrice," Frank said as she turned to go. She looked back at him. "I am glad you are here. I want you to know that." "I am glad too," she said softly, then hurried back to the house before she could say anything else. That night, lying in bed, Beatrice forced herself to examine her feelings honestly. She was attracted to Frank. There was no point denying it. More than attracted, she was beginning to care for him in ways that went beyond gratitude or friendship. She liked his kindness, his strength, his easy humor. She liked the way he treated everyone with respect, from his aunt and uncle to the greenest ranch hand. She liked that he had looked at her on that dusty street in Wallace and decided she was worth helping, but she did not know if he felt anything similar toward her. His kindness might be just that, kindness without deeper feeling. He might see her only as his aunt's helper, someone to be friendly with but nothing more. The thought of misreading the situation, of making a fool of herself, was mortifying. Better to focus on her work, she decided. Better to be grateful for what she had rather than risk it by wanting more. The summer heat intensified as June gave way to July. The ranch work shifted with the season, focusing on maintaining water sources and managing grazing patterns. Beatrice continued her routine, growing more competent and confident in her responsibilities. Martha increasingly treated her as a partner rather than a servant, consulting her on decisions and trusting her judgment. One Saturday evening after supper, Martha announced that they would all attend the church social in Wallace the next day. "It is time people in town met our Beatrice properly," she said, "and we could use a break from the ranch." Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness. She had not been back to Wallace since that first day, and the thought of facing the townspeople, of potentially encountering judgment or questions about her circumstances, made her anxious. But she could hardly refuse. Sunday morning brought a flurry of preparation. Beatrice wore her best dress, a deep green cotton that had been her mother's, altered to fit her slimmer frame. She took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid. When she came downstairs, Frank was waiting by the door, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt that made his tanned face look even darker by contrast. He looked at her and went very still, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful," he said finally, his voice slightly rough. "Thank you," Beatrice managed, feeling her cheeks warm. "You look very nice as well." The ride to Wallace was pleasant, the four of them taking the buckboard wagon. James handled the reins while Martha kept up a stream of conversation about who they might see at the social and what news to expect. Frank sat beside Beatrice in the back, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm near hers. The church was a simple white building with a tall steeple, surrounded by tall pines. Behind it, tables had been set up for the social, already laden with food brought by various families. People milled about, talking and laughing, children running between the adults in some complicated game. Martha immediately drew Beatrice into the crowd, introducing her to what seemed like dozens of people. There was Reverend Miller, a kind-faced man in his 40s with a booming voice. There were the Hendersons, whose ranch bordered Triple Creek. There was the doctor, the shopkeeper, several mining families, and more ranchers than Beatrice could keep straight. To her surprise, everyone was welcoming. If they were curious about her sudden appearance at the Garrison ranch, they were polite enough not to ask directly. Several women her age were particularly friendly, clearly starved for female company. "You must come to the quilting circle," a woman named Sarah Henderson insisted. "We meet every other Tuesday. It would be wonderful to have a new face." "I would like that," Beatrice said, meaning it. She had not realized how much she missed female friendship. After the socializing, they all gathered for the church service. Beatrice found herself sitting between Frank and Martha, trying to concentrate on Reverend Miller's sermon about loving thy neighbor while being intensely aware of Frank's presence beside her. Once, when they stood to sing a hymn, Frank's hand brushed hers as they shared a hymnal, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. After the service, the real social began. Tables groaned under the weight of fried chicken, roast beef, fresh bread, vegetables, pies, and cakes. Beatrice helped Martha set out their contributions, then accepted a plate of food and found a spot under a tree to eat. Frank appeared beside her, his own plate loaded high. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course not." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play and the adults talk. Then Frank said, "You made quite an impression. Half the town was asking about you." "I hope that is a good thing." "Definitely good, Mrs. Henderson told Aunt Martha that you are a lovely young woman and that I should not let you slip through my fingers." He said it lightly, but there was something watchful in his expression. Beatrice's heart began to pound. Did she really say that? She did. Aunt Martha agreed, apparently. They are not subtle women. Beatrice did not know what to say to that. She focused on her plate, pushing food around with her fork. "I suppose they mean well." "Beatrice." Frank set down his plate and turned to face her fully. "Can I speak plainly with you?" "Of course," she said, though her pulse raced with nervousness. "These past 6 weeks, getting to know you, watching you become part of the ranch and the family, it has meant a lot to me. More than I expected." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "When I saw you on that street in Wallace, alone and frightened, something in me just knew I could not walk away. And every day since then has confirmed that instinct. You are smart and hardworking and kind. You fit here in a way that feels, well, right." "Frank," Beatrice whispered, not trusting herself to say more. "I am not asking for anything," he continued quickly. "I know you have been through a lot that you might not be ready for, well, for anything beyond what we have now. But I wanted you to know that I care about you, Beatrice. Not just as someone who works for my family, but as you. As a woman I admire and am drawn to." Beatrice looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the hope mixed with fear of rejection. Her heart swelled with an emotion she had been trying to deny for weeks. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I have tried not to, tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or proximity, but it is not. I think about you constantly. I look for you around the ranch. When you smile at me, I feel warm all over. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone." Frank's face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "Really, really," she confirmed, laughing a little at his boyish eagerness. "Though I will admit I am frightened. I do not know how to do this, how to let myself care about someone when everything else in my life has fallen apart." "We will figure it out together," Frank said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and steady. "No pressure, no rush. Just if you are willing, I would like to court you properly. Call on you, take you riding, get to know you better, see where this goes." "I would like that," Beatrice said, squeezing his hand. "Very much." They sat there under the tree, holding hands and smiling at each other like fools, while around them the church social continued. It felt momentous and terrifying and absolutely right. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Beatrice's life. Frank courted her with a gentleness and respect that made her fall harder for him with each passing day. He took her riding through the ranch lands, showing her hidden meadows and mountain streams. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing while the sun set in spectacular colors. He brought her wildflowers picked during his workday, their stems slightly crushed, but their beauty undiminished. Martha watched their growing romance with approval, occasionally making pointed comments about young people not getting any younger. James said nothing directly but smiled more often, clearly pleased to see his nephew so happy. Beatrice felt herself opening like a flower to the sun, the hard shell she had built around her heart cracking and falling away. She laughed more, smiled more, felt more alive than she could ever remember feeling. Frank had a way of making her feel valued not for what she could do but for who she was. One evening in late August, they rode out to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The summer heat had broken slightly, and the evening air was pleasantly cool. They sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I have been thinking," Frank said, his tone more serious than usual. "About what?" Beatrice asked, though her heart already knew. She could feel the weight of what was coming, about you and me, about the future. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice, I love you. I know it has only been a few months, but I know my heart. You are the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life. You are strong and smart and kind, and you have made me happier than I ever thought possible." Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes. "I love you too, Frank, so much it sometimes frightens me." "Then marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife. Build a life with me here. I cannot offer you a fancy city life or grand adventures, but I can promise you honesty and hard work and all the love in my heart for as long as I live." "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and Beatrice felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, both of them grinning like idiots. When they announced their engagement, Martha cried happy tears and hugged them both, while James shook Frank's hand and welcomed Beatrice officially into the family. The wedding was planned for October, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that the winter weather might interfere. Those weeks passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice worked with Martha and the other ranch wives to make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory cotton with lace borrowed from Martha's own wedding dress. Invitations went out to friends and neighbors. Plans were made for a celebration at the ranch after the church ceremony. Beatrice wrote a letter to her late father's brother, the uncle she had never known, informing him of her upcoming marriage. She did not expect a response, but felt she should make the effort. To her surprise, a letter arrived 3 weeks later. Her uncle wrote that he regretted the estrangement from his brother and was pleased to hear Beatrice had found happiness. He enclosed a small check as a wedding gift and an invitation to write again if she wished. It was a small thing, but it felt like a door opening, a connection to her past that was not entirely painful. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, the October sky a brilliant blue. Beatrice dressed with Martha's help, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned the dress. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the glowing woman staring back. 4 months ago, she had been alone and desperate. Now she was about to marry a man she loved, surrounded by people who had become her family. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, adjusting Beatrice's veil. "Frank is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Beatrice said. "Without his kindness that day in Wallace, I do not know what would have become of me." "I think you would have found your way," Martha said. "You are stronger than you know." "But I am glad Frank found you, glad you are joining this family. You belong here." The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed like half the county had turned out for the wedding. Beatrice walked down the aisle alone, having no father or brother to escort her, but she did not feel alone. She felt the support of the entire community, these people who had welcomed her and accepted her as one of their own. And at the end of the aisle stood Frank, looking impossibly handsome in his best suit, his face shining with love and happiness. When she reached him and he took her hand, Beatrice felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, speaking about love and commitment and the blessings of finding a true partner in life. When he pronounced them husband and wife and Frank kissed her, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food, a fiddle player provided music for dancing, and laughter echoed across the valley. Beatrice danced with Frank, with James, with Tom and Pete and half a dozen other men. She laughed and ate and felt so full of joy she thought she might float away. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Frank pulled Beatrice aside. "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Garrison?" "More than ready," Beatrice said, loving the sound of her new name. They had moved Beatrice's few belongings into Frank's room, which was now their room. It was larger than the blue room she had occupied, with a big bed, a wardrobe, a desk, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Frank had added touches to make it more welcoming for her. A comfortable chair for reading, a vase of wildflowers on the dresser, and a new quilt that Martha had helped him choose. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife, Frank held Beatrice close and whispered, "I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already have," Beatrice replied. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me a home, a family, and love. I will never forget that." "You gave me just as much," Frank said. "You gave me someone to share my life with, someone who understands me and makes me want to be better. We saved each other, I think." Beatrice thought about that as she drifted toward sleep, safe in her husband's arms. He was right. They had saved each other. She had arrived in Wallace with nothing, and he had given her everything. But in doing so, he had found something he had been missing too: a partner, a love, a future bright with possibility. The seasons turned, and life on the Triple Creek Ranch continued its steady rhythm. Beatrice settled fully into her role as Frank's wife and Martha's partner in running the household. She continued managing the ranch books, now with even more investment since the ranch's success directly affected her own future. Under her careful attention, the accounts flourished, revealing patterns and opportunities that helped James make better business decisions. In the spring, Martha's arthritis worsened, and she gratefully turned over more of the household management to Beatrice. There was no resentment in the transition, only relief. Martha had carried the burden for decades and was ready to rest. She still helped with cooking and offered advice when asked, but the daily responsibilities now fell to Beatrice, who handled them with competence and grace. Frank and Beatrice fell into the easy partnership of a happy marriage. They worked side by side during the day and retreated to their room at night, talking and laughing and making plans for the future. Frank spoke of eventually expanding the ranch, buying adjacent land if it became available. Beatrice talked about maybe starting a small school for the ranch children and others in the area, reviving the dream that had brought her west in the first place. In June, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Frank, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. When she finally told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he looked at her with such wonder and joy that she started crying. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Frank said, pulling her close. "You have made me the luckiest man alive, Beatrice Garrison." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Beatrice continued her work as long as she was able, finally reducing her duties in her 8th month when Martha and Frank both insisted she rest more. The ranch women rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and promises of help after the birth. In February of 1886, on a cold but clear day, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Beatrice forgot all the pain. Frank, who had paced the hallway for hours, was allowed in once Beatrice and the baby were cleaned up. He approached the bed with reverence, looking at his son with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Frank whispered. "Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas James Garrison, after Tom the foreman who had become a good friend and after Frank's uncle who had given them both so much. Little Tommy, as he quickly became known, was a good baby, healthy and relatively calm. Beatrice took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning to nurse and soothe and manage on very little sleep. Frank was a devoted father, eager to hold his son whenever work allowed. On evenings, he would sit in the rocking chair Beatrice nursing Tommy, telling stories about the ranch and singing old cowboy songs in his pleasant baritone. Watching him with their son, Beatrice fell even more in love with her husband. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. A harsh winter in 1887 killed some of their cattle, but smart management and Beatrice's careful financial planning saw them through. Martha's health continued to decline, but she lived long enough to see the birth of Beatrice and Frank's second child, a daughter they named Martha Rose, in 1888. Young Martha, called Rosie to avoid confusion, was a tiny thing with her mother's brown hair and her father's blue eyes. Old Martha held her namesake with trembling hands, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. She died peacefully in her sleep 2 months later, and the entire ranch mourned the loss of its matriarch. James, grief-stricken but stoic, leaned heavily on Beatrice and Frank in the months following Martha's death. Beatrice tried to fill the void Martha had left, but it was impossible. Martha had been the heart of the ranch, and her absence was felt keenly by everyone. As Tommy grew into a curious, energetic toddler, and Rosie thrived as an infant, Beatrice reflected often on how completely her life had changed. 5 years ago, she had stepped off that stagecoach in Wallace with nothing but despair and desperation. Now she had a husband she adored, 2 beautiful children, a home she loved, and a community where she belonged. One evening in the spring of 1889, after putting the children to bed, Beatrice and Frank sat on the porch enjoying the mild weather. Frank had his arm around her shoulders, and they rocked gently on the porch swing he had built. "You ever think about that day we met?" Frank asked. "That day in Wallace when you stepped off the stage coach?" "All the time," Beatrice admitted. "I think about how lost I felt, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you appeared and changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Frank said. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you were there. You brought light and laughter and love into my life. You gave me a real family." "We gave that to each other," Beatrice corrected gently. "That is what makes it so special. We built this together." Frank kissed the top of her head. "I am glad I stopped that day. Glad I had the courage to talk to you." "I am glad I had the courage to trust you," Beatrice said. "When I told you I had no one and you said I had you, I wanted so desperately to believe it. But I had been disappointed so many times before. Taking that leap of faith was one of the hardest things I have ever done. And now I know it was the best decision of my life," Beatrice said firmly. "You were right, Frank. You were enough. You were more than enough. You were everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of Tommy crying, likely from a bad dream. Frank stood immediately. "I will get him. You rest." Beatrice watched her husband disappear inside, then looked out over the ranch that had become her home. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise. There would be more challenges, she knew. Life was never simple. But whatever came, she and Frank would face it together. As the years continued to pass, the Garrison Ranch prospered. Frank's careful stewardship and Beatrice's financial acumen made them one of the most successful operations in the region. They added land when opportunities arose, improved their breeding stock, and built a reputation for fair dealing that brought them loyal customers. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere, learning the cattle business from the ground up. Rosie was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded everyone of her mother. In 1891, Beatrice gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Henry Frank. Little Henry was a happy, chubby baby who rarely cried and smiled at everyone. Beatrice did eventually start her school, converting one of the unused outbuildings into a classroom. She taught not just the Garrison children, but also the children of the ranch hands and several neighboring families. It was not the prestigious Boston teaching position she had once imagined, but it was infinitely more satisfying. These children were eager to learn, grateful for the opportunity, and Beatrice poured her heart into giving them the education they deserved. Frank supported her teaching fully, helping set up the schoolroom and often stopping by during the day to check on her. He was immensely proud of his wife's intelligence and dedication, never hesitating to tell anyone who would listen that his Beatrice was the smartest woman in Idaho. James lived to see his grandchildren, as he had come to think of them, grow and thrive. He taught Tommy to rope and ride, told Rosie stories about the old days, and bounced Henry on his knee. He passed away peacefully in 1893, surrounded by family, his last words expressing satisfaction with how his life had turned out. Frank inherited the ranch, though it had essentially been his and Beatrice's operation for years. The transition was smooth, and they continued the traditions Martha and James had established while also implementing their own ideas and improvements. In 1895, Beatrice gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Alice, completing their family. The twins' arrival threw the household into cheerful chaos. Beatrice had her hands full managing 5 children, the school and the ranch accounts, but she thrived on the challenge. Frank hired additional help for the house, insisting that Beatrice not work herself into exhaustion. The children grew up surrounded by love and the beauty of the Idaho wilderness. Tommy announced his intention to run the ranch someday, working harder than any of the hired hands to prove himself. Rosie developed a talent for drawing, filling notebooks with sketches of horses and mountains and ranch life. Henry showed an early aptitude for numbers, often helping his mother with the books. The twins were still young but already showing distinct personalities. Eleanor bold and adventurous, Alice gentle and nurturing. As the new century approached, Beatrice sometimes marveled at the life she had built. She was 36 years old, mother to 5 healthy children, wife to a man she loved more with each passing year, and an integral part of a thriving ranch community. The scared, desperate young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 16 years ago seemed like a different person entirely. One summer evening in 1899, Beatrice and Frank took a rare evening ride alone, leaving the older children in charge of the younger ones. They rode to the hilltop where Frank had proposed all those years ago, dismounting to watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Do you ever regret it?" Frank asked, pulling her close against his side. "Regret leaving Boston, the life you might have had there?" Beatrice laughed. "Never, not for a single moment. That life was never really mine. It was built on appearances and pretense. This life, our life, is real and solid and good. I would not trade it for anything. Even when Tommy tracks mud through your clean kitchen," Frank teased. "Even then," Beatrice confirmed with a smile. "Though I do wish he would remember to wipe his feet." Frank kissed her temple. "You have given me such a good life, Beatrice, better than I ever imagined possible. 5 amazing children, a home full of love and laughter, a partnership that makes every day brighter. I am a blessed man." "We are both blessed," Beatrice said. "We found each other when we both needed someone most. You saw me at my lowest point and decided I was worth saving. I will never forget that, Frank. Never stop being grateful for it." "You saved me too," Frank reminded her. "I just did not realize I needed saving until you arrived. You brought purpose and meaning to my life. You made me want to build something lasting, something to pass on to our children." They stood together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and purple. Below them, the ranch spread out like a promise fulfilled. Lights began to glow in the windows of their home, where their children were probably starting to argue about bedtime. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and in the corrals, horses moved like shadows. "Come on," Beatrice said, taking Frank's hand. "Let us go home." They rode back through the gathering dusk, horses picking their way carefully down the familiar trail. When they reached the ranch yard, they could hear the children's voices raised in some dispute, and both parents smiled. This was life, messy and loud and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. The new century brought changes to the West. Electricity reached Wallace, though it would be years before it stretched to the remote ranches. Automobiles began appearing in town, strange mechanical beasts that spooked the horses. The rough mining town where Beatrice had arrived so long ago was growing more civilized, with proper schools and churches, and even a small hospital. But the Triple Creek Ranch remained much as it always had, a place of honest work and simple pleasures. Tommy, now a strapping young man of 18, worked alongside his father and the ranch hands, learning everything he needed to know to eventually take over. Rosie, 16, had become a talented artist whose sketches were displayed in the Wallace General Store. 14-year-old Henry was indeed helping with the books, showing an aptitude for business that impressed even his mother. The twins, now 10, We're growing into confident young girls with distinct personalities, but an unbreakable bond. Beatrice, approaching 40, felt more settled and content than ever. Her hair showed a few threads of silver, and there were lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But Frank told her she was more beautiful now than the day they met. She taught her school, managed the ranch accounts, raised her children, and loved her husband with a depth that only grew stronger with time. One afternoon in the summer of 1905, a stagecoach arrived at the ranch, unusual since most visitors came on horseback or by wagon now. Beatrice was in the kitchen preparing supper when Tommy came in to announce they had a visitor. "Says her name is Caroline Ross," Tommy reported. "Young woman, looks to be in a bad way. Asked if we might have work available." Beatrice's heart clenched with recognition, though not of the name. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the porch where Frank was already talking to the visitor. The young woman looked exhausted and frightened, clutching a worn bag much as Beatrice had done so many years ago. Her dress was dusty from travel, and her eyes held that look Beatrice remembered so well. The look of someone at the end of her rope, not sure where to turn next. Frank glanced at Beatrice as she approached, and she saw the recognition in his eyes too. He saw in this young woman what he had seen in Beatrice all those years ago, someone who needed help, someone worth saving. "This is my wife, Beatrice," Frank said to the young woman. "Beatrice, this is Miss Ross." She came to Wallace looking for work at the new hotel, but it seems the position was already filled. "I am sorry to impose," Caroline said, her voice trembling slightly. "The clerk at the general store suggested I try the ranches, said you might need help. But if you do not, I understand. I can try elsewhere." Beatrice looked at the young woman and made a decision, the same decision Frank had made for her years ago. "We can always use an extra pair of hands," she said warmly. "Especially with 5 children and a working ranch. Can you cook, clean, help with children?" "Yes, madam," Caroline said eagerly. "I can do all of that. I am a hard worker, I promise." "Then you are welcome here," Beatrice said. "We offer room and board plus wages. The work is hard but honest. You will be treated with respect and fairness." Relief washed over Caroline's face so completely that she swayed slightly. Frank steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning," Caroline admitted. "Well, that will not do," Beatrice said briskly, going into the mode she knew well from managing a large household. "Come inside. Supper will not be ready for an hour, but I can make you a sandwich to tide you over. Tommy, take Miss Ross's bag to the green room, please." As Caroline followed Beatrice into the kitchen, looking around with wide eyes at the large, well-appointed space, Frank caught his wife's eye. He smiled at her with so much love and pride that it took her breath away even after all these years. Later that night, after Caroline had been fed and settled into her room and the children had finally gone to bed, Beatrice and Frank prepared for sleep. "She reminded me of you," Frank said softly, pulling his wife close. "That day in Wallace, the same look of fear and hope mixed together." "I know," Beatrice said. "I saw it too. I remember exactly how she felt, standing there not knowing what would happen next. We had to help her, Frank." "You have such a good heart," Frank said, kissing her forehead. "You could have been bitter about your own experiences, could have decided that everyone should struggle as you did. But instead, you chose kindness." "I learned kindness from you," Beatrice reminded him. "You showed me that day that people can be good, that help can come from unexpected places." "How could I not pass that along? We are a good team," Frank said. "The best team," Beatrice agreed. Caroline Ross proved to be as hardworking as she had promised. Like Beatrice before her, she threw herself into the work, grateful for the opportunity and determined to prove her worth. She helped with cooking and cleaning, played with the younger children, and quickly became part of the household rhythm. Over the weeks, Beatrice learned Caroline's story. A family lost to influenza, no living relatives, and a desperate journey west looking for a new start. It was painfully familiar, and Beatrice did everything she could to make Caroline feel welcome and valued. One day, while they were working together in the kitchen, Caroline said quietly, "I want to thank you, Mrs. Garrison. Not just for the work, but for treating me like a person, not just a servant. You have no idea how much that means." "I know exactly how much it means," Beatrice said gently. "I was once exactly where you are now. Frank found me in Wallace with nothing and nowhere to go. He brought me here, and his aunt gave me a chance. Everything I have now came from that one act of kindness." Caroline looked at her in surprise. "Really? But you seem so established, so much a part of this place." "I have been here over 20 years now," Beatrice said. "But yes, I arrived with nothing but a carpet bag and a lot of fear. The Garrison saved me, and Frank gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. So when I see someone in the position I was once in, how could I not help?" "You and Mr. Garrison are remarkable people," Caroline said. "We are just people who remember what it was like to need help," Beatrice corrected. "And we are fortunate enough to be in a position to provide it." As the months passed, Beatrice watched Caroline bloom much as she herself had. The frightened young woman who had arrived on their doorstep grew more confident and capable. She laughed more, smiled more, began to believe in her own worth again. It was deeply satisfying to watch. Tommy, now 19 and a full partner in running the ranch, began paying particular attention to Caroline. Beatrice noticed the way her son's eyes followed the young woman, the way he found excuses to be in the house more often, the way he smiled when Caroline laughed. She said nothing, but she was not surprised when Tommy came to her one evening with a serious expression. "Ma, I need to talk to you," he said. "Of course, sweetheart. What is on your mind?" Tommy fidgeted, unusual for her normally confident son. "It is about Caroline. Miss Ross, I mean. I have developed feelings for her, strong feelings. I would like your permission to court her properly." Beatrice felt a wave of emotion. Her firstborn, the baby she had held with such wonder and joy, was now a man ready to build his own life. "Does she know how you feel?" "I have not said anything directly," Tommy admitted. "I did not want to make her uncomfortable, given that she works for us. But I think maybe she might feel the same way. We talk a lot when we are both working, and she seems to enjoy my company. Your father and I fell in love while I worked for his aunt and uncle," Beatrice said with a smile. "So I am hardly going to object on those grounds. If your feelings are genuine and honorable, and if she reciprocates them, then you have my blessing to court her. But Tommy, you must be respectful. Do not make her feel pressured or that her position here depends on returning your affections." "I would never," Tommy said firmly. "I love her, Ma. I want to marry her someday if she will have me, but I want to do this right." "Then talk to your father," Beatrice advised. "Get his thoughts as well. And then, when you are ready, talk to Caroline. Be honest about your feelings but respect whatever answer she gives." Tommy did talk to Frank, and Frank gave the same blessing Beatrice had. A week later, Tommy asked Caroline to go riding with him one Sunday afternoon. They returned hours later, both looking happy and slightly dazed. Tommy sought out his parents that evening. "She said yes," he announced, his face glowing. "When I asked if I could court her, she said yes. She has feelings for me too." Frank clapped his son on the back. "I am happy for you, son. Caroline is a fine young woman. Just like your father and I, you must take your time getting to know each other," Beatrice added. "Courtship is about building a foundation for marriage. Do not rush it." But there was a rightness to Tommy and Caroline that reminded Beatrice of her own relationship with Frank. They fit together naturally, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. Their courtship progressed over the following months, and by Christmas, Tommy asked Caroline to marry him. She accepted, and the wedding was set for the following June. The wedding was a joyful affair, held at the same church where Beatrice and Frank had married 22 years earlier. Beatrice watched her son pledge his life to Caroline and felt the circle complete itself in a beautiful way. She had been saved by the Garrisons' kindness, and now her son was marrying a woman who had been saved by that same tradition of compassion. After the wedding, as the celebration continued at the ranch, Frank pulled Beatrice aside. "Look at what we started," he said, gesturing to where Tommy and Caroline danced, so obviously in love. "That day in Wallace when I met you, I had no idea it would lead to all this. Children, grandchildren someday, a legacy of kindness passing from generation to generation." "You started it," Beatrice corrected. "You were the one who stopped to help a stranger. You taught me that people could be good." "We did it together," Frank said, pulling her close. "Everything we have built has been together. That is what makes it so strong." They danced together under the stars, surrounded by children and friends and the life they had created. Beatrice thought about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1884 with nothing but despair. She thought about the cowboy who had looked at her and decided she was worth helping. She thought about Martha and James, who had welcomed her without question. She thought about the children they had raised and the legacy they were building. "I love you," she told Frank, looking up into eyes that had not changed in all these years. "Thank you for giving me a life worth living." "Thank you for filling that life with love," Frank replied, and kissed her as the stars wheeled overhead and music filled the night air. The years continued their steady march forward. Tommy and Caroline built a small house on ranch land, staying close to family while establishing their own household. In 1908, they welcomed their first child, a boy they named Frank Thomas, continuing the family tradition of honoring those who came before. Beatrice held her first grandchild with tears in her eyes, marveling at how life circled back on itself. Rosie, now a young woman of 23, married a teacher from Wallace, a kind man named Daniel Wright, who appreciated her artistic talents and gentle nature. They moved to Boise, where Daniel had accepted a position at a growing school, but they visited the ranch often. Henry showed no signs of wanting to marry anytime soon, content to manage the business side of the ranch and talk about expanding into new ventures. The twins, now 15, were becoming young women, Alina bold and determined to travel, Alice quieter but with hidden steel. Frank, now in his 50s, showed touches of gray at his temples and moved a bit more slowly in the mornings, but he was still strong and vital. He worked the ranch with Tommy, teaching his son everything he knew, preparing to eventually hand over the reins completely. But he was in no hurry. He loved the work, loved the land, and planned to keep going as long as his body allowed. Beatrice, approaching 50, had become the matriarch of not just her family but the wider ranch community. Women came to her for advice on everything from bookkeeping to child rearing to marriage troubles. She taught a new generation of children in her school, instilling in them not just reading and arithmetic but values of hard work, kindness, and community. She had become what Martha had been, the heart of the Triple Creek Ranch. On a summer evening in 1910, 26 years after that fateful meeting in Wallace, Beatrice and Frank sat on their porch as they had countless times before. Their children were grown or growing, their grandchildren were arriving, and their life together stretched behind them like a rich tapestry. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked, taking Frank's hand. "When I told you I had no one, I said you had me now, and that was enough," Frank replied, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "You were right," Beatrice said softly. "You were enough. You were everything. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has brought. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you." "I cannot imagine mine without you," Frank said. "You brought light and love into my world. You gave me children and grandchildren and a partnership that has made every day better than the last. I was existing before you arrived, but I did not start truly living until you came into my life." "We saved each other," Beatrice said, echoing words Frank had spoken so many years ago. "We did," Frank agreed. "And we built something beautiful together, something that will last long after we are gone." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the brilliant colors of an Idaho summer evening. The sounds of the ranch drifted to them, cattle lowing in the distance, horses whinnying in the corral, the voices of Tommy and Caroline calling their son in for bed. From inside the house came the clatter of dishes as Alina and Alice cleaned up after supper. It was ordinary and perfect, and exactly what Beatrice had never dared to dream of when she had stood on that dusty street in Wallace with nothing but fear and desperation. She had whispered that she had no one, and Frank had given her everything. In return, she had given him a life rich with love and meaning. "Thank you," Beatrice said, though the words seemed inadequate for everything she felt. "Always," Frank replied, pulling her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "For as long as we both shall live and beyond." And there on that porch, surrounded by the life they had built together, Beatrice and Frank Garrison held each other close and watched the day turn to night, grateful for every moment of the beautiful journey they had shared since that day in Wallace when a cowboy decided to stop and help a stranger, changing both their lives forever. The end.